Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Namo Buddhaya, and welcome to another video at Shraddha Media Network. Today's video is being sponsored by the lovely family, headed by Mrs. Nirosha Dissanayaka from the town of Nugegoda. The main reason behind sponsorship is to wish her son, Tilon Anupa Karunaratna, longevity, good health, happiness, welfare, and the association of noble friends on his 10th birthday. And to wish the same for Mrs. Nirosha Dissanayaka, who is celebrating her 43rd birthday on the 16th of this month. Today I want to teach you, wonderful, meritorious people, about what the Buddha's main teaching is about. The Buddha's main teaching is focused around one thing. If you look at every discourse that he talks about, if you've heard about this before, you've heard that the Buddha's discourses are a total of 18,000 discourses. And they are split up into the middle-length discourses, the long discourses, the shorter discourses, like the Dhammapada that you've heard before. But although the teachings change in who said them before, which disciples said them before, what topic, what path that they talk about, it's always pointing at one thing, and one thing only. Just like the spokes on a wheel always point to the center, every single discourse of the Buddha points towards one thing. That one thing is what we call the Four Noble Truths. The Four Noble Truths are what differ the teacher, the Buddha, from any other teacher in the world. There are loads of people who can teach meditation in the world. There are people who can teach about different vows. They can even teach about merit and demerit. But only a Buddha can teach about the Four Noble Truths. As most of you have probably heard about before, the first Noble Truth is what we call the Noble Truth of suffering. The Buddha uses the word dukkha as the translation for suffering, but the truth is that word isn't good enough. The word suffering isn't dukkha. Dukkha has a deeper meaning. It is supported by the meaning of unsatisfactoriness, always life not being enough. The Buddha describes the cause of suffering as being craving, tanha. Tanha is supported by three things. And you've definitely heard of these things before. The first one is raga, which translates into greed. The second one is dvesha. Dvesha translates into hatred or anger. And then we have moha. Moha is what we call delusion. These three things work together to support craving. And they cause suffering for us and all other beings around us. So when it comes to our spiritual life as Buddhists, what we aim to do is to slowly, using the methods that the Buddha has taught us, to slowly eradicate these things like greed, hatred, and delusion. Although greed, hatred, and delusion work together, they have different roles. The Buddha says that, for example, greed is not actually very harmful, but it's really long-lasting. It's not very harmful, but it's really long-lasting. Hatred is short-lasting. It doesn't last for long, but it's very damaging. And then we have delusion. Delusion is difficult to understand, but the Buddha explains that in both ways it is harmful. It lasts for a long time, and that it is extremely harmful. On a practical basis, what I want to talk about today in Buddhism is how we actually deal with anger and what the Buddha has talked about when it comes to hatred and anger and things like jealousy. The Buddha explains to us anger damages two parties of people. The first party is yourself. You're the first person that gets affected by anger. And the second party is the group of people that you get angry at, or the individual that you choose to get angry at. the consequences of anger can be broken down in many different ways. But today I'll break them down as 3. You have the physical consequences of anger and hatred. Then you have the mental consequences. And then you have things like the spiritual consequences. Let's have a look at the physical consequences. If you look at it in a scientific manner, anger leads to more higher stress levels. And then with the stress levels, you have all sorts of health complications. You have higher blood pressure, you have heart disease, coronary heart disease. Also, you have the physical aspect. When you get angry, you might choose to physically hurt someone. When you physically hurt someone, you more than often end up hurting yourself too. The physical side of anger is fairly easy to understand, is because we can see it for ourselves. But the mental part is a bit different. The Buddha explains that the mental sides of unwholesome things are difficult to see. If you've ever heard about Satara Satipatthana, the 4 foundations of mindfulness, you'll notice that the Buddha first asks you to be mindful about the body, then about feeling, and lastly about mind. He asks you to do mind as the 3rd because it's not easy for us to see. But the Buddha was able to see these things. As you might have heard about before, the Buddha's eyes are different to us. We have brown, mediocre-looking eyes. The Buddha has 5 eyes that work inside of him. In Pali, you can call them the Mamsam Chakku, the Prajna Chakku, the Samantha Chakku, and the Dibba Chakku, and the all-seeing eye. That's the eye of wisdom, the eye of the Buddha, the eye of omniscience, and the normal flesh eye. We also share this flesh eye like the Buddha, but our flesh eye, our Mamsam Chakku, is actually very different from the Buddha. The Buddha's eyes, as we've heard about before, are dark blue in color. They're dark blue because the Buddha never, ever looked at anyone with anger. That's why his eyes are like a newborn baby calf's, is the example that he gives. In another way, the Buddha's eyes are different because the Buddha can actually see 1 yojana in length. A yojana is the Pali term for a distance between 10 and 12 kilometers. The Buddha can see 10 kilometers in front of him, whether it is light or whether it is dark. Have you guys seen mustard seeds before? Are they big or are they small? They're very small. The Buddha says that he can see, imagine a mustard seed, 2 mustard seed pots that are 10 kilometers from here. And someone standing there picks out 1 mustard seed and then places it in the other pot of mustard seeds. The Buddha, from 10 kilometers away, can choose which mustard seed that the man put in the other pot. So can you see how different the normal flesh eye of the Buddha is from ours? So imagine what the Buddha can see. So with his developed eye of wisdom, the Buddha can see the nature of the mind when it is angry, when it is full of hatred. The Buddha explains a very beautiful term in Pali called nivarana andhakarana. The word andhakarana means blindness. The Buddha says, kodan dhamman pasati. That means when someone is angry, they can't see what is right and wrong. They can't see what is good and they can't see what is bad. They can't see what is wholesome and they cannot see what is unwholesome either. With anger, it's difficult to understand, but let's take the example of being greedy. This same blindness also occurs when you're being greedy. Imagine this. Imagine you're at your favorite shop and you've gone into the store and you've seen something that you really want to buy. But the truth is, you can't afford it. You don't have enough money. But when you're in the store, do you not really feel like buying it at the time? You really want to keep it with you and you don't want to walk away from the store without it. But if you choose to be patient and go home and spend a couple of days thinking about whether you can really afford it, whether buying it is a good or bad thing, after a couple of days you'll realize that you don't need it. But when your mind is full of greed, it is difficult to see the right from the wrong. The Buddha explains the same thing. Krodham dhamman na passati. He says, when the mind is angry, it cannot see right from wrong. And this means if the mind is angry, it cannot identify the good things when it comes to practicing wholesome. He doesn't understand the Noble Eightfold Path. He doesn't understand the precepts. He doesn't understand anything to do with virtue. He doesn't understand generosity. He doesn't understand innocence, obedience, respecting elders. He can't see those things. When you're angry at home with your parents, do you remember that you need to be respectful for them? Yes? No, you can't remember. Because your mind is blinded by anger. So we've talked about the physical consequence of being angry. Then you have what we call the mental consequences. And lastly, what we want to talk about is the spiritual consequences. When it comes to the Western world, the spiritual consequences are what is most difficult to grasp. Because to understand the spiritual consequences, you must have a level of faith. You must have some Shraddha. You must believe that the Buddha's understanding is true. There's a very beautiful name that they use for the Buddha. Have you heard the word Tathagata before? Do you know why the word Tathagata is being used? If you have a look at a sutta called The World, in Pali it's called the Lokavbodha Sutta. The Buddha explains why the Buddha is called the Tathagata. The Buddha says, in the moment when the Buddha is sitting under the Bodhi tree and he understands everything in the world that should be understood, if you take that specific moment in time and then you take the 45 years in which he taught Dhamma to the whole world, and then underneath two beautiful sal trees, amongst the devas and all the monks, he attained final Nibbana. Between those two moments in time, anything that the Buddha says is always true. It is always true. It will never happen in any other way. If the Buddha said this is good and this has good consequences, no one in the world can say it will have bad consequences. If the Buddha says this is bad and it will have bad consequences, no one in this world can ever say it will have good consequences. That is why he's called the Tathagata. So the Tathagata and the Shraddha, or the faith associated that we have with the Buddha, is what enables us to see the spiritual side, the spiritual negative consequences of anger. If you've ever read the Metta Anisamsa Sutta, it's a beautiful discourse of what happens when you practice things like loving kindness, what happens when you practice things like anger. The Buddha explains to us, when someone is angry, one of the first things that happens is that he can't fall asleep easily. You've met some people in the world who find it really difficult to go to sleep. One of the causes of this is because of anger. The Buddha also explains that some people find it really difficult to wake up in the morning. The Buddha also explains this happens because of anger. Do you sometimes see bad dreams? Some people in the world always see bad dreams. The Buddha explains that if you have anger, that is the reason why you see bad dreams. Another consequence of being angry all the time is that your face becomes unpleasant to other people. That doesn't mean your skin color changes. That doesn't mean your eye color changes. It doesn't mean your hairstyle changes. But it means the spiritual consequence. Even if you're beautiful in the world, when people see you, they don't want to talk to you. They don't want to smile at you. That is one of the effects of anger. The Buddha also explains that if someone practices anger, the gods don't look after that person. They don't care about this person. They won't protect this person. The Buddha says, manussa piya hoti. That means he becomes pleasant to other human beings. In total, there are 11 consequences. We won't talk about all of them today, but there's a really important one at the end. The Buddha says, one day, that we are all going to be on our deathbeds, that we are all going to die one day. And most of us are often very scared when we think about this idea. In the Western world, people don't like to think about it. But the Buddha encourages that you should think about it. The Buddha explains here, people who are angry will get more scared on their deathbeds. It's one of the consequences. In Buddhism, we have a discourse in the Majjhima Nikaya, which is called the middle-length discourses. And there's a beautiful queen called Queen Mallika. She asks a very interesting question from the Buddha. She asks, there are some people in this world that are very beautiful, but they are not powerful or influential. And they aren't wealthy. There are some people in this world who are beautiful, but they are not wealthy and they're not powerful. But there are some people in this world who are wealthy, powerful, but not beautiful. There are some people in this world who are powerful, beautiful, but not wealthy. And you get to see the different kinds of diversity in between these three people. Mallika asks the Buddha, Buddha, what is the reason why some people are wealthy? They have lots of money. But there are some people who are not powerful. And there are people who are not beautiful. What is the reason behind this? What is the spiritual consequence behind this? What is the spiritual reason? The Buddha explains, people who are angry, as a karmic effect, in the next lifetime, they are not born beautiful. If you practice anger. If you are jealous at other people's success, if you don't like some of your classmates doing better than you, if you don't like the people at work getting a promotion, the jealousy will lead you in your next life, you will not be influential. You will not be powerful. No one will listen to what you say. And thirdly, the reason behind wealth is generosity. If you don't practice giving to other people, the karmic consequence is that you will be born poor in the next lifetime. So these are some of the spiritual consequences. The last spiritual consequence that we want to talk about is the spiritual consequence of karma. In the Western world, the word is translated as karma. Karma is the positive or negative consequence of our actions. We can do actions in three ways. We can do actions in body. We can do actions in speech. We can do actions in mind. All three of these things have consequences in everything that we do. So let's take, for example, the 5 precepts that we like to protect. If we take the first precept, if someone, through anger, decides to kill other beings or hurt other animals, the karmic effect is that the next lifetime, they will die in a young age. They will die when they are young. If someone through anger decides to steal other people's things, they will lose their wealth. If someone through anger conducts sexual misconduct, doesn't treat his wife or husband fairly, in the next life, the karmic effect is that they won't have any friends. If through anger someone practices telling lies, the Buddha says that person, in the next lifetime, when they are telling the truth, no one will believe them. They will get blamed for things that they never ever did. So these karmic consequences are all from anger. So we've covered spiritual, we've covered physical and mental consequences. So we have a rough idea that we need to be practicing something to get rid of our anger. Buddhism offers a very beautiful tool, and you have probably heard about it on many occasions. And that tool is what we call metta. In Sinhala, we translate it into maitri. In English, it comes across as loving kindness. But what is loving kindness? Loving kindness can be practiced. Most of the time, we've heard it as a meditation. And the meditation starts not with practicing towards anyone else, but is practicing towards yourself. The Buddha explains if you don't understand how to be kind to yourself, that you can never be kind to the world. Let's try and understand this a little bit more. During our lives, sometimes we make mistakes. We do wrong things in our lives. But sometimes when we try and move away from doing bad things, we always remember, I did this bad thing, I did this bad thing, and we can't move away from it. Do you know why this happens? It's because we don't have loving kindness for ourselves. The Buddha says, first you need to be compassionate and you need to be forgiving yourself first. If you cannot forgive yourself for mistakes, if you can't cure yourself of anger, cure yourself of jealousy, you cannot help or think about anyone else. When it comes to Buddhist meditation and loving kindness, there are 5 sentences that you've probably heard about before. The first sentence is, may I be free from hatred. The second one is, may I be free from anger. The third one is, may I be free from jealousy. May I be free from suffering. May I live happily. So the first step is to remember these 5 sentences. And then you have to practice towards yourself. The Buddha then encourages us, after we've completed successfully approaching loving kindness to yourself, you then have to start practicing it to the people around you. But you don't do it to the whole universe straight away. First you start with doing it to the people who are close to you. So you draw a little circle around your head and you apply it to everyone in your house. So may all beings in this household be free from hatred, be free from anger, be free from jealousy, be free from suffering. May all beings in this household live happily. After you do your household, you increase it to your city, then to your province, then to your country, then to the world, and then to the other parts of the universe. The Buddha is the person that taught us about loving kindness. The Buddha did this because he practiced loving kindness himself. He went and completed it to the point where no one in this universe can challenge him when it comes to his loving kindness. In some discourses, you will see that when the Buddha decides to practice loving kindness towards one individual, the other individual starts to feel it inside his body. He feels it and his anger stops, and he turns around to come meet the Buddha again. That's how powerful the Buddha's loving kindness is. There's a beautiful story long, long ago when there was a young boy in Savatthi who was born into a very wealthy family. And when he was a young boy, he was standing on a balcony and he looked down at the ground and he saw loads of people carrying incense and flowers. And he saw them and he asked them, where are you going? And they said, we're going to see the Buddha. He teaches us about suffering and how we can escape it. And the boy says, I'm going to come with you. And he joins the crowd and visits the Buddha. He listens to one discourse, and he's the only son in a family, and he's very wealthy. After he listens to the discourse, he thinks, I want to ordain, I want to become a monk. He goes to the Buddha, and the Buddha says, first you must ask for your parents' permission. He goes home and he asks his mother and father, and the mother and father say, no, you are my only child, I cannot do it. He says, mother, father, I'm not going to eat for a whole week. And he stops eating. He fasts. He sits down on the ground and doesn't eat for a whole week. He says, if you do not let me ordain and become a monk, I will die. Unhappily, the mother and father let him ordain, and he becomes a beautiful monk. He lives with the Buddha at Jetavana monastery, for 5 years, and he learns the precepts, he learns the dhamma. But because Jetavana is a very busy place and there are lots of monks, after 5 years of training, he thought, I want to go live in the forest monasteries. I want to live away from people. And what he does, he goes and lives in a deep forest, and he builds himself a little hut, and he stays there, and he practices the meditation that he learned. He practices and practices. But unfortunately, for some reason, he can't understand the Dhamma. His mind doesn't become concentrated. He doesn't develop any samadhi. But he practices for 13 years. After 13 years, one day a visiting monk comes to this hermitage. And when the monk visits, the monk gives him water, washes his feet, and treats him like a guest. And this new monk who has just arrived has arrived from Savatthi. He talks with him about the Dhamma. And without telling him that he's the son of the wealthy merchant, he asks this new monk, "Monk, there's a very wealthy family from Savatthi. How are they? Are they doing well?" And the monk says, "My friend, do not ask me about that family. Their only son went to become a monk. And after that, everyone started cheating them. All of their businesses collapsed. They lost everything. Now they are beggars on the streets." As soon as this old monk heard this, he became extremely sad. He started crying. And when the new monk saw the tears rolling down his cheeks, the monk asked, "Why? Why are you crying?" He said, "My friend, that old couple, they are my parents. I am the person that left them behind." The new monk said, "You need to go look after your mother and father. Yes, it is true. It is because of you that they are now on the streets." The monk then decides to go back to Savatthi. He decides to go back to the Jetavana. He collects all of his belongings. He takes his robes and his bowl, and he heads back on the road. When he arrives at the road splits into two. There's one road that goes to Savatthi, and there's one road that goes towards his parents' house. He thinks to himself, where shall I go first? And he says, after 13 years, my parents haven't seen me. They can wait one more day. After I go home, I will not be able to see the Buddha very often. Therefore, I will go and see the Buddha. So he takes the road towards Savatthi. He goes there, and the Buddha, with his 5 eyes, he sees this monk coming. He sees that this monk is sitting with the group of monks. And he talks about a very beautiful sutta called the Matuposaka Sutra. It talks how a monk can support his family, how he can support his parents while still being a monk. This monk who is sitting inside this audience, he becomes really happy. After listening to this discourse, he decides, I am not going to go home. I will stay in this sasana. I will stay in this ordination, and I will look after my parents. He then takes a ticket for some food, and he accepts some food before he goes home. And he arrives at the doorstep of his house. There are different owners there. And he walks further down the road, and he sees the old couple. When he arrives at the old couple, his father is feeding his mother. They had just gone on begging rounds from themselves. They are now beggars. As soon as their son, the new monk, approaches them, the mother says, Monk, we have no food to give you. We are also beggars. Please go somewhere else. As soon as the monk heard this, he started crying. He didn't move. The father then said, I think this is our son. And the mother walks up to the monk and looks up to the monk's eyes. And the mother sees, this is our son. They both bow at the feet of this monk, and they both started crying. The monk says, do not worry. I will go on alms every single day. I will go on pindapata every single day. And I will bring food for you. Please do not worry. So what this monk then did, every day he would go for pindapata twice. On the first time he would go for his mother and father, and after they had eaten, he would go for himself. And he did this for a long time. But with Pindapata, sometimes they get food, but sometimes they don't get food. The mother and father, they became strong and healthy, but sometimes there wasn't enough food for the monk. The monk started becoming thin. He started becoming very skinny. The other monks started to see this, and the other monks asked, "Monk, you look so skinny. You look very weak. What is wrong?" And the monk says, "I'm looking after my parents. Therefore, I'm getting very skinny. Sometimes I don't get enough food." The monk starts shouting, "You shouldn't do this. The food for Pindapate is not for lay people. It's for monks. It's not suited to give for lay people." The Buddha then heard this conversation. The Buddha then said, "Do not say this to this monk. What he's doing is right. A long time ago, millions of years ago, I did the same for my parents. I looked after them too, just like this." And the Buddha then started telling a story. The Buddha then said, a long time ago, in the city of Benares, there were 2 villages of hunters. There were 500 people on each side of the village, and it was separated by a beautiful river. The two chiefs of these 2 villages, they made a promise to each other. They said, "If you have a son and I have a daughter, we will make them married. And once they get married, they will run both these villages." And they made a promise. After some time, yes, one had a son and one had a daughter. But they had both arrived from the Brahma worlds. They didn't like the idea of marriage. But the parents insisted, "You must get married, you must get married." But this couple did not want to get married. They wanted to become monks. But unfortunately, the 2 powerful families got together and got them married. But after they got married, although they were hunters, they never hunted. They wanted the 2 grandparents, they wanted sons and children, but they would not make children. After 5 or 6 years, the grandparents, they said, "You 2 are useless. You don't do any hunting. You're not providing any children for us. What are you doing with your lives?" And they said, "If you let us, we will happily become monks." And the 2 parents said, "Okay, you 2 become monks. We have tried our best." And what they did, they put on beautiful robes, they shaved their heads, and they left for the Himalayas. When they left for the Himalayas, in 𝗙𝗢𝗪, the god Sakka has a wonderful seat. It's called the Yellowstone throne. This throne started heating up. The god Sakka has 1,000 eyes. He looked at the human world and he thought, "Why is my seat getting hot?" And he saw that 2 very good beings decided to leave for the Himalayas. God Sakka has a good friend called Vishwakarma. Vishwakarma is what we call a divine architect. He's very good at creating things. The god Sakka tells Vishwakarma, 2 beautiful beings are going to become monks. You need to build them a hermitage. Vishwakarma builds them a beautiful hermitage. And the 2 newly ordained monks, they arrive there, the couple, and they see that a beautiful hermitage has been built for them. There's wonderful flowers everywhere. There's fruit everywhere. Every day, the wife would go and pick flowers. She would bring back fruit. The husband would look after the house. But they would practice virtue. After some time, the god Sakka, he came to the husband and he said, "I see a danger in you. In the future, there will be a danger that you need to have someone to look after you. You 2 need to have children." And the husband became very angry. Why did he become angry? Because they didn't want children. He said, No, we cannot have any children. We are virtuous people. We don't want children." The god Sakka said, "Okay, I will give you a child. Next month, on the full moon day, go to your wife and touch her belly button with your finger. And after you touch the belly button, a newborn child will come to her womb. And on the next full moon day, as soon as the husband touched the wife's belly button, into the womb, a beautiful baby boy came. That baby boy's name was Sama. Sama was the Bodhisattva. This was Buddha's previous lifetime. Sama grew up to be a wonderful child. He had so much loving kindness that the whole forest, all the animals in there, they stopped fighting each other. The lions wouldn't hunt the deer. The birds wouldn't eat on the worms. The bears wouldn't hurt little animals. It's all the power of loving kindness. Sama's loving kindness was so great that he looked after his parents every day. When he was young and and he was newborn, little baby birds would come and bring fruit for Sama because of Sama's loving kindness. But one day, Sama was a person who worried a lot. He worried about his mother and father. The mother and father would go out to pick fruit, and he would stay by the edge of the hermitage and look into the forest until they came back. And one day, the mother and father were really late, and he waited on the path. The mother and father had run into some trouble. What had happened was a storm had come, and when the storm came, they had sheltered under a tree. Underneath the tree, there was a small anthill. And who lives in anthills? Cobras. When it was raining, the sweat and the rainfall had mixed together and fallen into the anthill, and the cobra inside smelt the sweat and the perspiration, and he became very angry. The cobra came outside, and he was a spitting cobra. As soon as he saw the parents, he spit venom into the parents' eyes, and both these parents became blind. They started panicking. And do you know the reason behind this? The reason was in a previous lifetime, the parents were both doctors. When they were doctors, someone had not paid for some of the surgery that they had done on the eyes. And because they hadn't paid, both of them made her blind. That's why they both became blind. And Sama came to the forest and found these two parents. And he became extremely sad. One day, the king called 𝗙𝗢𝗟𝗪, the king of Kasi, he wanted to do hunting. And he came to the forest. He came to the forest looking for deer. Sama would often go to the forest hunting for deer. He would go looking for water with the deer, and while looking after his parents. He would look after his parents he would put ropes everywhere inside the hermitage so they could walk around by themselves, and he would do all the food gathering. One day this king came to do some hunting, and he saw Sama. When he saw Sama, the king thought that he was a deva. The king thought he might be a naga, and he pointed a poison arrow, and he fired. He fired the arrow, and it hit Sama. When it hit Sama, it went in through his left side of his body and came out of the right-hand side. But when this happened, Sama didn't collapse onto the ground. He stayed mindful. He walked back with an arrow inside him and sat on the side of the lake. The deers had all run away out of fear. 𝗙𝗢𝗟𝗪 then the king talked with Sama, and he found out that his parents were both blind. He became extremely upset. Sama then lost consciousness. His eyes closed. The king followed the path and found the parents. And what the parents did is something very beautiful. Both the parents, they asked the king to take them back to Sama's body. And the mother made something called an asseveration of truth. An asseveration of truth is what we call a satya kriya. He touched Sama's body and said, "My son, throughout his whole life, he's been virtuous and has been practicing loving kindness throughout his whole life. And because of this, by the truth of this, may he not lose his life. After this, Sama opened his eyes. A couple of moments later, another Deva came. And after this Deva came, the king asked, "Who are you?" And the Deva said, "7 lifetimes ago, this was my son. There is no one in this whole human planet who is more dearful to me, who's more pleasant to me than this boy." And at the end of the story, Sama regains consciousness and gives beautiful advice to the king. Maha Kassapa Maharatang Mahanse and Baddha Kapalani are the mother and the father. The god Sakka is Anuruddha Maharatang Mahanse. The king is Ananda Maharatang Mahanse. And Sama is the Bodhisattva. If you look at the loving kindness here, you can see all the spiritual consequences. You can see that the Devas will protect you. You can see that weapons do not hurt you. You can see that all other beings in this world will look after you. Without practicing loving kindness for ourselves, we will never see the Dhamma. It's not a small thing in our practice. It's not just there so you can live a happy life now, but it's there for the understanding of the Dhamma. Kuddhan Dhamman Pasati. If someone has anger in their mind, they will never see right and wrong. So as a summary, what you need to remember is that loving kindness is the main method of dealing with anger. There are physical, mental, and spiritual consequences when it comes to being angry and hateful all the time. So in our lives, what we need to do is, just like Sama did it, this Jataka story is there so we can practice this too. So using these tools, may we all be able to understand the Four Noble Truths in the Gautama Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Today's Dhamma sermon is sponsored by Mrs. Nirosha Disanayaka from the town of Nugegoda. And with the merits of this discourse, first we would like to share all these merits with the heavenly deities. May all the heavenly deities live peacefully, have longevity, good health, happiness, and may all the deities in the heavenly worlds be able to understand the Four Noble Truths in this dispensation. May they also protect these wonderful, meritorious devotees and support them in understanding the Four Noble Truths in the Gautama Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. We would also like to share these merits with our teacher, Pinwat Lukuswami Mahanse, and also to all the monks at Mahamona Monastery. May all the monks at this monastery be able to understand the Four Noble Truths in the Gautama Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. We would also like to share these merits with all our departed loved ones and relatives, especially with the late Father Mr. Don Hemapala Disanayaka, who departed recently on the 4th of March last year, and also to share the merits with Mr. Hendrik Disanayaka, Mrs. Emmeline and Mrs. Baby Nona, who have all departed. May all our departed ancestors and loved ones in their new lives be full of longevity, good health, happiness and welfare. And may they also be able to understand the Four Noble Truths in the Gautama Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. We would also like to mainly share these merits with Thilon Anupa Karunaratna, who is celebrating his 10th birthday, and also to Mrs. Nirosha Disanayaka, who's also celebrating her birthday with her son and celebrating her 43rd birthday on the 16th of this month. May both of these people enjoy longevity, good health, happiness and welfare, and be able to develop their noble path and be able to understand the Four Noble Truths in the Gautama Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. We would also like to share these merits with the son Naveen Vimukti Karunaratna, and to the daughter Amanda Karunaratna, and to Dinula K. Gunaratna Puta, and the son Hasiru Hansika. May all these children enjoy longevity, good health, happiness, welfare. May they be able to complete their education studies, develop sila, samadhi, and wisdom, and may be able to understand the Four Noble Truths in the Gautama Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. We'd like to share these merits with all the sponsors of this broadcast and to those in their family, to their children and everyone who have supported them and helped them in their lifetimes. May they be able to understand the Four Noble Truths in the Gautama Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. We'd also like to share all these merits with all the monks at Mahamuna Buddhist Monastery who are progressing along this dispensation, to all the Anagarika nuns, to the trainees and everyone in expectation of ordination, to all the team at Shraddha Media Network, and to the monthly donors and benefactors of Shraddha Media Network. May all of these meritorious people be able to understand the Four Noble Truths in the Gautama Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Theruvan Saranai. Namo Buddha.
Namo Buddhaya, 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 Namo Buddhaya.
මෙවැනි වටිනා ධර්මදේශනා ශ්‍රවණය කිරීමට ශ්‍රද්ධා ඩේලි YouTube චැනලය සබස්ක්‍රයිබ් කරන්න.